Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad. Tehami. US President Donald Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have spoken over a phone call and discussed, as per the statement released by the White House, the areas of technology, trade, energy and defense cooperation. Now, this is the first ever interaction between the two leaders after the recent inauguration of the US President Donald Trump. The White House statement also said that during the discussion, the visit of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was also discussed. Likewise, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs said the two leaders will meet soon on a mutually agreed date. This particular statement also, more interestingly, urges India to buy more of US defense equipment and also keep trade relations on an equal footing. Now, these two important points, so we'll be taking the analysis regarding as to what do these two specific points depict and what sort of an impact these two points are going to have on the overall trajectory in the future of the bilateral relationship between the US and India, and what could be the likely response of the Indian side on these two conditions if we deem these two particular points. So also we had seen President Donald Trump regarding India's response on illegal immigration had said to the reporters that India will do what's right on illegal immigration. So what's going to be the trajectory under Trump 2.0 as far as US and India's bilateral relationship is concerned? What was the trajectory? And we'll try to take the comparison of how this particular bilateral relationship fared during Trump's first presidency. For that, we are honored to be joined in the studio by Dr. Salma Malik, foreign affairs expert. Dr. Salma, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by other participants and I'll be introducing them as they join in. Dr. Salma, so before going into the detail of what was discussed in this particular phone call, the first ever interaction between the two leaders of the US and India, let's take a quick stock of how President Trump's policy had been during his first term towards India.
Thank you so much, Jawad sir, for having me in the program. The biggest magnum opus of Trump's previous tenure vis-a-vis India was his visit to India. And if you recall, Narendra Modi was wearing a dress which had his name in the strips. And when Trump came, he had this expectation that he would be given elephant rides and all of that stuff. And at the same time, there was a massive anti-Muslim crackdown in India, in Delhi. And all of those things were happening just a few kilometers, rather half a kilometer short of where Modi and Trump were meeting, and the US was simply not bothered about it. So it's going to be a very, very fascinating honeymoon between these two, or resumption of honeymoon. The main aspect is that they need to renew their economic relations. They have a common feature, which was China, which still remains China, and that is going to be, this is what bound them previously and this is going to bind them again. Then there are a lot of commonalities in their strategic vision that they have for their respective growth as well as each other's growth, and this is something that Trump tried to build in the previous tenure. Narendra Modi and they both have similar personalities, a lot of pomp and show, a lot of fascinating ultra-nationalist conversation, a lot of uncomfortable conversation, which has now become a norm and being accepted by people. So it was a massive affair that these two countries and these two leaders had. Although there was a dampener about the GSTs being imposed on India and Trump doing some economic measures in that regard. Yet at the same time, the three main features, their common vision, AUKUS Accord, anti-China approach, and the fact that they share a lot of commonalities that put them together on the global platform, would work, had worked and would work for them in the future just as much. And rather it will go a further step. And of course, the biggest binding factor is the defense purchases, which has been hinted, and we are going to talk about that later. But the defense purchases, the US needs money, and India with loud cash in its pockets is the only lucrative partner that the US can find at this point and had found that point to group together with.
Right, we'll go into the detail of those particular points also. We are honored to be joined by another participant, Dr. QamarCheema, Foreign Affairs expert, joining us on Skype. Dr. Cheema, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Before going to the discussion of these particular points which have been discussed between the two leaders in their first ever interaction after US President's inauguration, I just want your understanding of what were those common points during Trump's first presidency between India and the United States of America at that particular time, and do you see the resumption of those common things happening this time around, or by looking at these two important points which have been urged by the US for India to have more purchase of the US defense equipment and also have the bilateral trade on equal footing? Do you see the trajectory is going to deviate this time around a little bit? Cheema, kindly unmute yourself, please. Dr. Cheema, unfortunately, we can't hear you. If you can kindly unmute. Okay, we'll try to reconnect. We'll try to reconnect with Dr. QamarCheema. Unfortunately, there seems to be a little bit of a technical issue. We can't hear Dr. QamarCheema. So we'll try to reconnect with him. Dr. Salma, now, the common points, were there any differences at that particular time also between the US and India?
2-3 uncomfortable factors which I think would now be worked out and weeded out was the immigration issue, was a migrant issue, and so many Indian nationals who were not naturalized at that time. But this time the factor that we see is that India has agreed to take back the illegal migrants and it will work accordingly. And then there's of course going to be some way of naturalizing them. And we have also seen how Subramaniam's positioning at Trump's inauguration and all. So that's a lot of symbolism attached to that. Plus the fact that the trade issue was a thorny point in the previous regime, which may again resume that particular dark cloud in the relationship. But India is very prudent, so is the US. The US needs to sell its heavy merchandise, which is the defense infrastructure and the defense systems, and the US and India is going to make it show that it gets whatever it needs as a result of that. So they would find some common point where they can actually smooth out those gray areas and work together on that.
Okay, so you already described quite in detail those commonalities between the two leaders as far as the personality is concerned, the kind of convergence of their policies as far as their countries were concerned during the first tenure of President Donald Trump, and you're of the view that there is going to be a resumption of that particular relationship between the two this time around also. Also specifying that trade relations between the two were one of those thorniest issues between the two. Now, there was also suspension of GSP status of India by President Donald Trump, despite all those meetings as well when Donald Trump came to India, as you already described in your first take. And then we saw that a huge rally in Houston as well, that Howdy Modi rally in which President Donald Trump also participated. So why, despite all those commonalities, there happened to be issues as far as trade is concerned? What's the US perspective on that?
Well, you see, the US is now more than ever before, especially Trump in his second tenure is going to make this aspect very pronounced, that it's the America First approach. And this is something which is making a comeback after nearly a century of how it used to be after the First World War, the America First policy that the US had. And in that, of course, the economic factors weighs in very high. We have just also received the news that the US is planning to take back ammunition that it left in Afghanistan, as if there is any ammunition left at all. But the fact is that the US will try to tie up as many ends as possible, and Trump's major priority would be absolutely on economics and having stronger trade in favor of the US rather than otherwise. And you see, what is India, as has been speculated, what will it get from the US? It will get liquor, it will get some soft aspects, but the US is more than willing to sell its military hardware. So unless and until those things happen, the US is not going to talk to India, especially when it comes to these factors, although there are a lot of other features that will bring them together. At the same time, the Indians are also calling it an economic terrorism or economic pressure, an aggression coming from the US, that they are trying to impose things on us in terms of what they want to sell us and what they don't want to.
Why are they calling it economic terrorism? Some are also calling it economic bullying as well.
Absolutely.
When is it because of the comparison of the size of the economy of the two?
Absolutely. I mean, there is no comparison when it comes to India's economy, which is 10 times less than what the US economy is all about. But then we also need to see as to how much investment in terms of human resource and otherwise Indians have done or New Delhi has done, especially in the US polity. Mark Rubio, his wife, several other key aides have Indian origin partners, and there's going to be a lot of special pulling from the New Delhi side into the US politics, and it's going to be a very fascinating second tenure, because it's going to be all hands off, gloves off approach, and they'll see what maximum they can achieve from these 4 years that they have at hand.
So what were the impacts, what were the effects on that particular bilateral relationship at that particular time, vis-a-vis the economic and trade relationship between the two countries were concerned after the suspension of GSP status from US of India? I'll come back to you for your view on this particular thing also. Dr. Cheema, how do you see what there are more of commonalities as far as the bilateral relationship between India and the US during Trump's first presidency or first tenure is concerned, or were there more of differences at that particular time? How do you take a stock of the bilateral relationship at that particular point in time?
Can you hear me?
Please go ahead, loud and clear now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Salma, for speaking on my behalf on the first question. So I think the important thing in terms of that, in the first term, I think Donald Trump and the India did engage on Indo-Pacific. That was one thing, and the Indians are always feel very confident that there is a bipartisan consensus in the United States about Indo-Pacific and Quad, and that's why in Donald Trump's oath ceremony, all the Quad foreign ministers were there. This is one thing. Previously, Donald Trump was looking India differently. At that time, if you remember, there were events like Howdy Modi. Narendra Modi wanted to pitch as if the Indian audience to the United States that they could be the potential voters for the Republicans. And for this matter, there were events held in India and the United States when Donald Trump and Narendra Modi spoke. So that was completely a different era and different time. This time, Donald Trump is more confident, he's more assertive. And if you just look at the statement that came from the White House and from the Prime Minister Office of India, there is a difference, as you mentioned in the intro. Donald Trump is more interested to sell the American weapons. But the question is that Indians don't want to buy the weapons which the Americans want to sell. They want to get the cutting edge technology, one thing. Secondly, they want the transfer of the technology. United States is very slow in the transfer of the technology. That basically annoys the Indians. And Indians have the money. And this is what the Americans understand. So they want, the Indians want transfer of technology, and Americans want that we should give them the weapons where the transfer of technology is not there, but we should just sell them the military assets as we sell it in the Middle East and other places. So, and India has this theme of Atmanirbhar Bharat, where they believe that you should make in India approach. So bring everything here. For example, recently this Tejas fighter jets, which India is manufacturing, which is very slow. The Indian Air Chief did speak on that in the last 30 years we only made I think 35 Tejas jets, and in those jets it used to be there. It was supposed to be an American engine, general engine. So the point is that there is no the technology transfer is very slow. They want to see Indian behavior, and whenever India speaks of strategic autonomy, they talk of multi-alignment. That basically annoys the United States. And that, for example, you might have seen how India continuously got the Russian oil, and this there is a disagreement, and that's a challenge which Donald Trump believes that countries like India, which are partner with the United States, but at the same time they're buying in oil from the Russians. So it seems that at this time there are more challenges for the Indian government, and those challenges are because India is naturally improving its relations with China. If you just see that 2 days ago, India's foreign secretary was in China and he met with Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, and they did say that we need to move on. We need to. The Chinese are asking them to look things from strategic height. It means zoom out and look that China is not an enemy of India, but Indians believe that they have a competition with China. So I think there's a lot of equations which we need to see. But this time, Donald Trump
I
is.
get your point, Dr. Cheema. I see you're part of the interjection over here. Before going further into the detail, very important points that you've raised already. Let's specifically talk about this particular statement. As you already mentioned, that what Americans actually intend to sell to the Indians, and what is the intention as far as the Indians' perspective is concerned. They want the transfer of the technology, they want the acquisition of the cutting edge technology. On the other part, it is something different the Americans want to sell to India. And this time around, President Trump is more assertive, more confident, as you've already put it out. So is it going to be more challenging this time around for the Indian authorities? And looking at this particular statement, do you see it a very precise condition that will set the tone of the bilateral relationship between the two countries in the coming months and years to come?
Well, in my assessment, in terms of intentions on both sides, I think Donald Trump is very much serious. For example, when Jaishankar was there and India made it very clear that we are going to bet thousands of Indians who are illegal. So India did realize that we may have to face tariffs if we do not accept the illegal Indians from the United States. So you can imagine that India is a quad partner. India is a comprehensive global strategic partner, but Donald Trump's administration is not going to forgive India on this illegal immigrants who are in the migrants who are there in the United States. So you can find this thing. On the other things, I think Narendra Modi's statement is all about defense, it's trade, technology, and all these things. Well, Donald Trump's statement is completely different. So I think it will all depend that how the Defense Department and the National Security, chief advises Donald Trump, because at the end of the day, all the bureaucracy in the State Department and the Defense Department, they will tell that what kind of weapons we can sell to the Indians. And at the same time, although there are all kind of clearances for India, and for example, the previous administration of Joe Biden, where the former NSA Jack Sullivan was in India, and they removed many of India's companies which were under sanctions, and there is a probability of nuclear cooperation, there is a probability of space cooperation, and critical and emerging technologies in these areas. There is a cooperation between both the countries. There is a lot of work which has been done by the Biden administration and the Trump first administration. But the problem at the moment is that they have to look at the behavior of the Indian government, that whether Indian government is going to work with the Donald Trump administration in terms of the way they want India's behavior to be or not. That is a question. So in this situation, we will understand that how the Donald Trump is going to offer to the Indian government.
So Indians in a position at this particular point in time, if they're not willing to go by the tone which which is going to be set or is already being set by the U.S. authorities at this point in time, so how the Indians are going to go about that? Are they in a position to have the confrontation mode on against the U.S. administration? I'll come to you, Dr. Cheema. For now, we are honored to be joined by another participant, Mr. Mian Sanaullah, former ambassador, joining us on Skype. Mr. Sanaullah, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. How do you look at what do you think are the key drivers behind President Trump's push for India to buy more U.S. defense equipment?
Basically, as stated by Dr. Cheema, it is all trade. And the wish of the new President Trump to equalize the trade and balance it. But I differ slightly that would China buy it? I think China would buy it to a large extent because China, the enigma about Indo-US relationship has already been resolved in the shape of a permanent strategic decision on both sides. And now the relationship would be more adjusted or repositioned in the light of Americans' relations and tensions or competition with China. It would be an enhancement, not a stagnation or a slide down between India and America. So the countries in the region have to be little watchful. And I don't see that Trump would be very hard on India, even in order to raise the tariffs or impose any restrictions on Indians' acquisitions of weapons from other states like US, like Soviet Union or Iran or some other technology from other countries, France. But the focus would be to keep India on its side. And to what extent India would go along with the American president and his behavior to be the first and to be the greatest, I think is really needed to be watched carefully. I do see, to a large extent, the symbol of Houthi and Trump again. It is not an impossibility. And as far as relations in this trilateral ties, say India, China, and US, I think Pakistan has to be very, very cautious, very watchful. Pakistan is still important for America, but its relevance is not that much. And the only relevance is Afghanistan and the Gulf area, and otherwise it would be seen on transactional basis, and Pakistan will have to create some kind of space and show to America that it is still interested, and it is not all out for another power which is peaceful, which is our strategic choice, and we do not object or obstruct Americans' choice of India as a strategic ally, but we would be only disturbed and would be agitating when this strategic relationship between US and India start nibbling us or biting us. That is the point.
So, okay, so if India goes by the tone of the line which is being set by the US administration at this point in time, and there happens to be more purchase of the weapons from Indian side, from the US, how is it going to affect the regional security paradigm?
Of course, it is going to. Already, India has accumulated so much weapons. It has disturbed the balance, and it is going to create arm race between the country, within the regions. And it would not only be Pakistan who would be buying or trying to buy something new or acquire some new technology. It would be other powers as well, and it would be bad for the region, bad for the peace and stability, and it would be disastrous, I would say. But as pointed out by Dr. Cheema, India would put its own conditions, but those conditions, then there would be a compromise, and things would keep moving between US and India, because they have already signed almost 4 fundamental agreements, which are really very, very strategic. And we should not forget those and their implications for Pakistan. Pakistan has to be very, very careful and while dealing with America, and that is where we have to focus our attention.
Mr. Sanaullah, please stay with us. Dr. Salma, now what could be the challenges for Pakistan if this particular bilateral defense cooperation goes further and both reach a compromise despite having differences, whatever they might be on the way from here onwards? How and what could be the challenges for Pakistan and the challenges for the regional stability and security overall, and how should Pakistan be responding to it?
Jawad, one thing I need to point out here is the discussion that Ambassador Sanaullah and Dr. Cheema have also mentioned. We have to understand that it's not a relationship of unequals at the moment between the US and India, despite the fact that you pointed out that the trade volume and the economy's volume and size are very, very non-comparable, and the deficit is huge. But India looks at itself as a partner rather than as a lower state when it signs deals and terms with the US. So that makes it kind of at this moment, and the US is also treating India as such because it needs India to counter China, to have all these aspirations that it aims. What does it hold for Pakistan? Direct implications, the pressure for Pakistan will become much greater. We have a lot of our domestic challenges that we have to deal with, not to take into account that we cannot afford further external challenges, and this is going to empower the bullying attitude of Modi's India, and the pressure on Pakistan on that regard would be bigger. When it comes to armament or the arms racing, India is going to benefit more directly from any type of arms purchases that it makes, or there is a transfer of technology or whatever minuscule arrangement in terms of defense agreements that is going to make India more superior and make Pakistan the conventional wing higher. Then at the strategic level, there could be more pressures on Pakistan. Afghanistan is not going to be a focus for this government, for this administration at all, which also means that Afghanistan would become a moot point for Pakistan, and there would be more terrorism entering into Pakistan, and there would be less pressure on Afghanistan to perform better because Trump didn't really want to have much to do with Afghanistan, and that makes Pakistan handle 2 very difficult frontiers at the same time. What will they do with Iran? That also depends. How the Middle Eastern situation is going to develop after the type of conversation that has been heard with regards Middle East about the Palestinians being asked to leave and go to Jordan and Egypt, which again is going to make this entire region directly and indirectly difficult, and Pakistan is going to be a center stage because we are an important Muslim country. Indirectly, and then of course the China factor, and the China factor will make Pakistan pressures for Pakistan, both direct and indirect. Any trade agreement, any strategic agreement between Pakistan would immediately be met with sanctions or any type of reprisal measures that we have seen already happening. So these are the worst case scenarios. What can Pakistan do to mitigate these challenges? Try and find common grounds of conversation. We still have a lot of capital when it comes to human resource. We have some very strong active lobbies, and we need to capitalize on them. Talk to them very prudently. We should not be emotional. We should not actually think that Trump's coming into the US politics means that it's only about Pakistan. That's not the case. We have to be very, very prudent and logical in our assessment of the global situation, because it's a very, very difficult moment for us. At the same time, Pakistan has offered dialogue options several times to the Indians. If the US administration thinks that they can actually bring about some better rapprochement between these two countries, Pakistan should capitalize on this.
But at that particular time, if I remember it correctly, there was an offer of mediation between the two by President Trump.
Absolutely.
And that was not accepted by the Indian side.
Obviously.
So do you expect any sort of a different response this time around?
No, they will not. Because there is no pressure on India. India is not at the receiving end at all. But if there is anything, Pakistan should give it a very strong, happy nod, yet not totally fall over or topple over or think that this is the only offer. At the same time, Pakistan also needs to bring this point home that we have our requirements, we have our needs that makes us closer to China, and we have a very deep friendship with China, which needs to be recognized by the global community, and we are not doing it to scorn anyone, or we are not doing it on the behest of our relationship with the US. It is going to be a very difficult diplomatic maneuvering for Pakistan, but we have the capacity to do it, and we need to do it. There is a need for bilateral, there is a need for multilateral. Pakistan is entering the UNSC as the president. How well can we capitalize on that? We need to see to this. We also need to have better people-to-people contact, and I think we also need to broaden the horizon of our public diplomacy beyond the few capitals that we usually move around. So let's take a moment of reckoning and see that these mounting challenges, how can Pakistan one by one slice them away and face them. It's not going to be something impossible. It may be difficult.
Right. There was a very interesting scenario that was sketched by Dr. Cheema in his take, that it's something different the Americans want to sell to the Indians, but the Indians want the cutting edge technology and a quicker transfer of technology for them as well. And if that doesn't happen, do you think it's going to be one of the stumbling blocks as far as the future trajectory between these two under this particular administration of the US is concerned?
You see, Indians are a hard bargainer. Since the signing of the strategic partnership, the US also feels frustrated because whatever they would offer to India, they would say, no, we want more, and this is not good enough. We want that thing and not this thing in the shop. We want that pie or the piece of the cake. So it's always a difficult tango these two countries have fought with each other. The US would resist transfer of technology, but we have also seen that the US has, since the Vietnam moment, moved a long way when it would not at all offer its weaponry to any country to the point that it is doing so. So Indians have managed to bargain that. There could be a factor where there is some transfer of technologies to India, which could be neither here nor there. Or there could actually be a simple point where nothing of that sort happens, and absolutely that will give India and the US relations a difficult point to maneuver about. But India has also several other factors through which the US can appease it. And the US does not really plan in annoying India beyond a certain point, so they will keep them busy. How much they can offer them, the US has a big tedious process, but we also need to keep in mind the role of the lobbyists, the Indian lobby, the Friends of India, and all of those factors, the people who have contributed to the campaign. How are they going to get their piece of flesh from this particular game? Right. So it's going to be a fascinating tango that we are going to see in the coming years.
Mr. Sanaullah, given the fact that there have been findings, Indian state sponsorship of terrorism on the Canadian soil, and then we saw the assassination attempt on the US soil also. There was a reaction on the part of the Canadians, also other Western nations, including the US itself. How do you think that could be affecting the trajectory under Trump's administration between India and the US? And do you think President Trump is going to take this matter up with the Indians on a serious note? Mr. Sanaullah, can you hear me, please? I think we've lost the connection with Mr. Sanaullah. Dr. Salma, do you think this particular issue is going to be considered by the Trump administration?
That's actually interesting, especially, I mean, one wants to ponder, especially after Prime Minister Trudeau announcing that he's going to step down. So how is it going to be in the larger context? Because it's going to be a very different Canada that the Indians are going to face now. It's going to be much more favorable to them. So it entirely depends. It entirely depends on how the Indians sell this particular story to the Americans. Of course, there's going to be very little tolerance, and I hope there is little tolerance in Trump's USA about having their citizens or migrants being killed extrajudiciously.
And that particular immigration, the largest deportation drive is actually aimed to avoid all those happenings on the US soil.
And if it happens, how is Trump going to react is going to be a major litmus test on how his tolerance towards India's aggression and ambitions are going to be. So, I mean, I may actually be coming across as someone who's saying that the relationships would be all honky-dory between the two, but that's not going to be the case. It's going to be an interesting time to see where both of them have a lot of points of convergence, but then there are these factors where India is also getting much larger than its shoes, and if it becomes that factor, then the US might actually start feeling the pinch of India's larger shoes, knocking at its doors, doing these killings, trying to getting away with it. The fact that we are there and we have arrived and we are partners rather than having an asymmetric relationship. So the US, in its quest for US first, is going to keep the Indians checked, and that was also the point behind the GSP as well that was signed earlier on. But these are few of the factors that will kind of check and mate these relationship and keep the game pretty interesting. Quite an interesting and insightful discussion. Thank you very much for your time. Unfortunately, we are short of time. I'll have to wrap the show quickly over here. Dr. Salma, Malik, Foreign Affairs expert, joining us in the studio. Once again, thank you very much for taking time out for our show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.